I never knew my maternal grandmother, for she died 18 years before I was born. But over a period of 19 years, she had 12 children, the last of which was my own mother. But my grandmother came nowhere near to the record for the most number of children, because in 1959, a woman in North Carolina gave birth to her 32nd child, including 4 sets of twins. The oldest American woman to give birth was 63 years old when she had a daughter in 1996. Moreover, the world record was set just 5 years ago when a woman in India had a child at the age of 74. Now, all of those years were done under the benefit of fertility treatments. And 57 is the oldest age a woman has ever given birth naturally. So when the Bible describes Sarah giving birth to Isaac at the age of 90, it is truly a miracle, because by that point in time in her life, as it is for all women, her eggs would have been depleted. And so the combination of her age and a lifetime of being unable to bear children led her to laugh when she overheard God's declaration of Abraham that she would bear a child. After all, I think you might do the same. And in that declaration, as it is recorded in Genesis chapter 18, verse 14, the text explicitly states that it was made by Adonai, who was appearing in human form. All you got to do is just read the text, and you can see how this is true, which I believe was a pre-incarnate appearance of Yeshua. And he asks, as he's speaking to Abraham, "Is anything too difficult for Adonai? At this appointed time, I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Now let's contemplate this question for just a moment. Is there anything that is too difficult for God? After all, he brought this universe into existence, as they say in the Latin, ex nihilo, out of nothing, simply as an exercise of his omnipotent will. Now, from a scientific perspective, that is an absolute impossibility. And yet that is something that science cannot explain and cannot contradict and cannot provide any kind of acceptable alternate explanation. Because this immense amount of matter and energy that exists in the universe cannot self-generate. It just defeats any kind of logical thought. Nor can science explain the infinite nature of the universe, the size of the universe. It's not like there's a wall there somewhere. But what's on the other side of the wall? So this entire concept of infinity in terms of scope and infinity in terms of power is beyond our comprehension. The only plausible explanation is that an all-powerful deity created the universe and set it in motion. And based on that inescapable conclusion, if you're being totally honest, what then could be possibly too difficult for Adonai? Make your list and compare it to creating the universe out of nothing. The only question that really matters here is whether or not what he does in this world is part of his sovereign will. Because there are some things that he will not do. He will not lie because it is contradictory to his nature. But the point is, what matters is not what he can or can't do, but whether or not he determines that it will happen. That is what truly matters. And then for us, the question boils down to whether we will accept his sovereign will or not, especially over the circumstances of our lives. So here in Genesis chapter 18, the will of God was made known to Abraham. and also to Sarah, who was listening at this moment right here in her tent. It was the protocol in those days here, which explains why she laughed to herself inside the tent. It's kind of like, yeah, that's going to happen? No. And then there's this dialogue where they said, you laughed. We heard you. She said, no, I did not. Yes, you did. I'm not going to read the whole text, but it's a great story. The Hebrew word that is translated here as appointed time is moed. It is derived from the verb ya'ad, which means to set an appointment. The word is described in one context where Adonai met Moses at the tabernacle in order to speak to him. That's in Exodus chapter 29. It was also used by Solomon when he called the leaders of Israel to Jerusalem when the Ark of the Covenant was transferred from the tabernacle to the temple. It was an appointment for all of the leaders to come. So Ya'ad conveys the meaning of someone with authority calling those who are subject to that authority to meet him at a specific time and place. So that is why moed is used in the biblical context for what we translate today as the feast. We call them the moedim, which are appointments called by God, not suggestions to be ignored. So this concept conveys basically the same idea that we have in our modern context when appointments are set. So you might have a doctor, for example, who is looking at your record and say, you're due for a checkup. Let's set an appointment for that time in which you're expected to show up. Now, in the case of Sarah, this verse describes the scheduling of God's appointment 1 year later. You see that in the middle of the verse here. And the fulfillment of that plan is described in chapter 21, which reads, Then Adonai took note of Sarah as he had said, and Adonai did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Yitzhak, or Isaac. Again, we see the use of moed, for appointed time. We also see here that the birth of Isaac was the fulfillment of God's promise. And it occurred at a particular time in the lives of Abraham and Sarah that was considered to be impossible for having children from a human perspective. But from God's perspective, as we have seen, nothing is too difficult for him. He just makes it happen by overriding natural circumstances and phenomena simply because he wills it. And he does it in his perfect timing because when he sets an appointment, he always keeps it. Well, we should not be surprised then to see that in the rest of Isaac's life, it is impacted by God's sovereign will in a number of ways as he shapes the circumstances of his life around him. Most notably, in Genesis chapter 22, after Isaac had grown to be a young man, Adonai set another appointment with Abraham and Isaac, and this time they were instructed to go to Mount Moriah, where Abraham was called to offer his son as a sacrifice. But it was in actuality just a test of Abraham's faith, which only required him to demonstrate his willingness to obey God in a literal fashion. And then the Malach Adonai, the angel of the Lord, cried out from heaven, telling Abraham to stop, and instead to sacrifice a ram that was caught in a thicket. Now, as I've pointed out many times, God never does anything that is random in nature. He always has a plan that he reveals by building upon previously revealed truth. So the story of Isaac is much like that, for it doesn't stand alone, but rather it serves as a foreshadowing of a far more impactful appointed time that would be the culmination of God's plan for this world. And that appointed time is the arrival of Yeshua to this earth to live for a lifetime and for a much more significant purpose by bringing redemption or salvation to a very needy humanity because of sin. So one of the ways that God confirms the unfolding of his plan is by raising up prophets to describe explicit elements of that plan in advance. And another way that he does that is in the use of typology, in which he shapes specific elements of a certain person's life in such a way that they foreshadow and are consistent with a later culmination of that plan in the life of Yeshua. And I want to show you how that is true between the lives of Isaac and Yeshua. And we see this then in what we would call the parallels between the lives of Isaac and Yeshua. First, both were conceived in a miraculous way. Isaac was born at a time when Sarah was physically unable to conceive. And at the same time, Yeshua was born to a virgin named Miriam, or what we call in English Mary, and was the result of being conceived by the Holy Spirit. Secondly, both births were announced beforehand. The angel of the Lord, the Malach Adonai, announced Isaac's impending birth to Abraham and to Sarah in Genesis 18:10. In Luke chapter 1, the angel Gabriel announced Yeshua's birth to Mary. Both were given names by God before their births. So we have that specifically with Yitzhak, with Isaac in Genesis 17, and Yeshua in Matthew chapter 1. Both births were acknowledged as not being impossible for God. As we saw earlier, when Sarah laughed in disbelief at the news of God, of her having a son in her old age, the angel of the Lord asked, "Is there anything too difficult for Adonai?" Those words mirror the words of the angel Gabriel's response to Mary's question, how she could conceive as a virgin, saying, "For nothing will be impossible with God." Both were born at a specific time that was appointed by God. We already saw how that is true with Isaac. The same is true for Yeshua, for we're told in Galatians 4:4, when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the Torah, under the law. Both were the only sons of their fathers. That was true from Isaac, from God's perspective, in spite of Abraham's earlier indiscretion. For Adonai called Isaac Abraham's only son in Genesis 22. And Yeshua was foretold by the prophets many times as being the Son of God. Isaiah chapter 7, chapter 9, Psalm 2, Proverbs 30, Daniel chapter 3, for example. Both were bound to wood for sacrifice. According to Genesis 22:9 on Mount Moriah, quote, "Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood." And that meant following the common practice then that they did in those days, in which they would bind the forelegs of a lamb to their hind legs. So the binding was at the point of their hands and their feet. Likewise, the hands and the feet of Yeshua were bound with nails to the wood of the crucifixion cross. Both were offered as sacrifices at the same location. You know that? Mount Moriah, where Isaac is taken as part of that same ridge. You cannot see it today because of the development in Jerusalem. But if you just look at the topography, you can realize that it's part of that same ridge that continues over to the place where Yeshua was crucified nearly 1,000 years later. Coincidence? I think not. Both offerings involve the provision of a lamb. Abraham's declaration in advance actually applies to both Isaac and Yeshua when he said in Genesis 22:8, "God will provide himself the lamb for the burnt offering." And in Yeshua's case, he was also identified as the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Both sacrificial offerings involve thorns. In Genesis 22, the ram was caught in a thicket of thorns. And as part of Yeshua's crucifixion, he was caught in a crown of thorns on his head. Both sons were submissive to their fathers who loved them. In the narrative of Genesis 22, Isaac never resisted his father, even to the very moment when he's placed on that altar. And this is one of the most amazing things that I think in all the Bible. Isaac never protested the fact that he was about to be sacrificed. Who does that? In similar fashion, on the eve of his crucifixion, Yeshua said to his Father, "Not my will, but your will be done." Both fathers were willing to allow their sons to be offered as a sacrifice. By raising the knife, there was no doubt of what Abraham's intentions were at that point in time, his will. And regarding Yeshua, the prophet Isaiah said in advance, 700 years before Yeshua was born, Adonai was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief if he would render himself as a guilt offering. Both had the assurance of their resurrection. Abraham acted with that kind of confidence in Genesis chapter 22. What did he say to his servants as they're going up to Mount Moriah? Because the servants couldn't go all the way. He said, "We will return. I and the lad will return." And in Hebrews 11, we are told that Abraham believed that God could raise Isaac from the dead. And in the same way, Yeshua repeatedly foretold his own resurrection. Lastly, both were born in order to fulfill God's promises for the well-being of humanity. Isaac was the long-awaited son who was promised to God in Genesis chapter 12 that would lead to the fulfillment of the blessing of all the families of the earth that would come through the Messiah, Genesis 12:3. And Yeshua was the ultimate fulfillment earlier from Genesis 3:15 of an offspring who would redeem humanity from sin after the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden. It's all there. It's all there in the book. And there's much more that I could add, but the extensive similarities between the lives of Isaac and Yeshua simply cannot be overlooked or explained away as mere coincidence. For the Genesis account was written by Moses, and the Gospels tell a parallel story 4,000 years later with precise details that were completely out of Yeshua's control in his life. A wise person then, after considering the facts, will come to the conclusion that God intended for people to see that the true story of Yeshua is so important that he exercised his creative and omnipotent power over the life of Isaac, in order to show that he was the true author of both stories. In other words, God wants us all to see how he had his hand upon Isaac, so that we might agree that he would do even greater things with Yeshua. After all, is anything too difficult for Adonai? The same question applies to us in other ways as well. Whether we realize it or not, God continually establishes appointed times in our lives. In the most general sense, we're told in Ecclesiastes 3 verses 1 and 2, there is an appointed time, a moed, for everything. And there is a time for every event under heaven. Time to give birth and a time to die. And in between that beginning and ending, God establishes for us divine appointments that on the surface look just like random occurrences. You ever had an important need and you weren't sure how to address it? But then you met someone, you received a phone call from a random caller that enabled the need to be met? That is exactly what happened on our Israel tour this last year, right, Kim? When she faced a potential health disaster due to missing medication that could not be replaced, and try as we might, we could not find a doctor that could give her a prescription. so that she could get that medication. But then the next morning, someone else received a phone call from someone who had the power to get her the medication. And that call came completely out of the blue. That was not connected to her situation. That was a divine appointment. And we know that, right? Many of you know my personal story about how I faced cancer twice in my life. And both times, I'm not going to tell you the whole story here. I'll give you the ultimate condensed version here. At both times, the same person showed up immediately after I found out that I had cancer and prayed for me on the very spot. And I was healed both times. And there's no doubt that it is miraculous in nature. Second time, I had a 2-centimeter mass on my esophagus, confirmed by what's called a barium swallow x-ray. But they weren't sure whether it was malignant or not. So I had a endoscopy scheduled to go in and to do a biopsy. And the doctor put that scope in, and he pulled it out, and he said, there's nothing there. This was 4 days after I had been prayed for and found out that I had this situation. How can I not say that that wasn't a divine appointment? When I walked out the building that day and I watched that van coming into the parking lot and the window rolled down and there was that same woman that had prayed for me at the previous time when I had cancer. What if I had walked out that door to my car 30 seconds earlier or 30 seconds later? I would never have seen her. Timing is amazing. In fact, I can look back over my entire life and see numerous times when God was shaping my life in such a way by bringing into it appointed people at appointed times. Not the least of which was my schedule in high school, my class schedule, that lined up in such a way that there was only one class the entire time that I was there. That there was another girl that was in that particular class, turned out to be biology class. And 2 years later, that classmate became my wife. And that began a shared journey that I had no idea that would lead to this moment right now at this place, 53 years later. And I think about this. What if we had not met? Would we not have come to the same, would I not have been able to have someone in my life that would support the same conclusion, that would come to the same conclusion, that would lead to this journey with all these many ministry opportunities leading up to this day? See, as I look back, that was truly a divine appointment. He set my schedule and her schedule at the same time. And I'm sure you can do that, but if you just stop for a moment and you think about your own life, all these important encounters that you've had, it is good to see that God not only has the ability for us to exercise our own will, but at the same time, He exercises His will in such a way that He doesn't turn it into a puppet show, because we're exercising our own will at the same time. Because we tend to think there's like a dichotomy where everything is fate-oriented or everything is man's free will-oriented. Both can be true at the same time. Why? Because is anything too difficult for God? He can do that. And when our lives come to a close, whether we realize it or not, God has decreed that all people will have an appointment to stand before Him, in which we will have to give an accounting of our own exercise of our will. That is the message of Acts 17:31. It says, because He has fixed a day in which He will judge the world in righteousness, through a man whom He has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising Him from the dead. Notice that the day has been fixed or put on God's calendar as an appointment with humanity. But He alone knows what that day is. And we will get no more advance notice of the specific timing of of when that will occur. It's just a matter of being prepared for that day whenever it does come. Notice also that this certain proclamation leaves no doubt that this appointment will be with Yeshua, the same Son of God who appeared to Sarah, Isaac, and previously to Hagar, and later to Jacob and Joshua, all of which are recorded unequivocally in the Tanakh, the Old Testament. Read those passages very carefully, and you will see that the Malach Adonai who appears to them is identified as being God every single time, which explains why they are so amazed that they did not die when they were face to face with that person. Panim al panim, just as Jacob says, wrestling with him. And as such, the basis for a favorable outcome in this inevitable coming judgment is whether or not we have agreed in our lifetime that Yeshua died in our place and secured our own resurrection and everlasting life, just as the Hebrew prophet Daniel foretold in his 12th chapter. Well, in the meantime, God continually appoints us for very specific purposes, like calling us to stand alongside the covenant nation of Israel. That is his message to all of us in Isaiah 62, verse 6. It says, Al chomotaik, on your walls, O Jerusalem, I have appointed watchmen. All day long and all night, they will never keep silent. You who remind Adonai, the Lord, take no rest for yourselves. We who believe God at His word take this very seriously. We trust in His promise, as He has clearly stated in Jeremiah chapter 31, that He will preserve Israel as a nation before Him as long as the universe exists. He talks about the sun shining by day, moon and the stars by night, the waves crashing on the seashore. As long as those things are occurring, He will preserve the Jewish people. So we believe that is true. And the promise is based on God's Brit Olam, the everlasting covenant that He gave to Abraham and repeated to Isaac and then to Jacob and then the 12 tribes and then to 1,000 generations, as it says in the book of Psalms, which I believe is a number that you cannot measure. But that does not stop the enemies of Israel from trying to thwart God's plans by trying to do away with the Jewish people. So we all need to take this appointment that He has given to all of us here very seriously. To be watchmen on behalf of Israel through our public proclamation rather than keeping silent, through our prayers by reminding the Lord, and rather than taking rest for ourselves or maybe ignoring these things altogether, to get up and to stand alongside. And so when we begin to take these things seriously, when we start to think in terms of the divine appointments that we see in our lives, often without being aware that they are happening, when we go beyond that to the point when then we start looking for the way that God is at work in our lives, when we start seeing the world in a new reality, where we are facing the great challenges that come our way without wavering, because we realize that we are never alone, never forsaken by God. My hope is that we will all come to realize that there is nothing that is too difficult for Adonai, while at the same time being learned to accept His will for our lives. So may God's truth be manifested in our thinking. May His grace be sufficient for us at all times. And may His presence be very real for us, to those who seek Him and seek to do His will.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And with that, I'd like to invite a few, I guess more than a couple, who are very dear to me. My dad, Lior, Itzik, Guy. Oh, no, I guess just Lior, Itzik, and Guy, please.
My name is Lior.
Al titbayesh, Guy. Don't be shy.
This is Itzik. We came to say thank you, convey our deep, sincere appreciation for this congregation, for the efforts of many of you and of this congregation to support our vigils on the bridge, to not let the public forget for a minute that hostages were still held in Gaza. Especially, I just want to mention a few names. John, Idan, Uli. Uli took upon himself to take care of the security, and diligently every time he came, set up his security cameras. Excuse me. John and Idan were there first, before me even, before I rolled in with a truck to help us set up. And Patty, who made sure every Friday night that our prayers are going where they need to go with their shofar. And Susan, who is still in Israel.
She's on the camera right there. Say hi to Susan.
Hi, Susan, and thank you.
She's in Israel.
Just a few words from Itzik, and by the way, Itzik is a nickname for Isaac, Yitzchak. I had no idea what's going to be the parasha today when we set up this setup today.
But they're no coincidence, right?
But as Galen said, that's how it is. So a few words from Itzik.
Hi, everybody. My name is Itzik. In Hebrew, it's Yitzchak, which means Isaac.
Wood left.
Isaac, and very appropriate for today's sermon. I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to add a little story that will show you that God takes care of Isaac. 9 years ago, I was on my bike on a road, San Pablo Dam Road. I had an accident. A car hit me, and I was bleeding to death on the road. And seconds after the accident, a nurse, an ambulance company person, and an emergency response person from the military arrived on the scene. Wow. And they were able to keep me alive until the ambulance came, and I got to the hospital with I think my blood pressure was like 250 over 60 or something like that. So yeah. Lior said it all. When we started this vigil 2 years ago, actually almost to the day, the first person I called was Lior and Odelia. And I knew Idan, of course, from social gatherings, but I never knew about you guys. And over the 2 years that we've been doing this, this group has been, the people that Lior mentioned were the most consistent participants in this vigil out of the whole community of over 200. And a few times the three of us were, and Yoav, by the way, is apologizing for not being here. We were considering stopping the vigil because it was just getting difficult. And you guys showed up every time, and many times it was just the three of us and a few people from this congregation and maybe one or two more people. And I don't know what was our impact on the release of the hostages. Today it was announced that a hostage has been in captivity, dead hostages has been in captivity for 2 years, is known, they know where he is and is going to be returned. There's only about 4 more. Hopefully all will be returned very, very soon. And I don't know, sorry?
Since 2014.
Yeah. Oh, 12,
Golden.
12 years? Adar Golden. Yeah, he's been captured in a previous operation in Gaza. And with his return and hopefully the 4 others, our job will be really done. And I don't know what was our impact. Lior once calculated about 2,500 cars go under the bridge on a Friday. That's right? 2,500?
1,000.
25,
In the 2 hours.
Yeah,
in
in
both
the-
directions, approximately. We counted.
yeah. So definitely we made the fact that the hostages were there known, but you guys definitely, your representatives definitely helped the whole thing going for a long time, and we really appreciate your contribution and sticking with us. When we started it, we decided that it's going to be an apolitical group, and we have people from all directions, and I think you guys showed us that the love of Israel and the love of the Jewish people can bring us all together to do great things, and we really appreciate it. So to recognize
Galen?
that, תעזור לי להוציא את זה.
We just made a small plaque.
Oh, wow.
Perry and John and Uli, can you please come? Galen. Galen.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. You want to?
Yeah,
You want
yeah.
to read it?
Yeah. So I will read this.
Your mic's on. Your podium mic's on.
Oh.
Your mic's on.
Okay. And this reads, presented to Brit Hadasha Messianic Congregation with deep gratitude for your unwavering commitment and support of the Bring Them Home vigils, November 2023 to October 2025. And it has a picture then of the overpass from down below. And yeah, there you go. And I just want to say to all of you who we've shared this time on the bridge together, our work is not done. Right? So we will continue to pray, and we will continue to make ourselves available as needed. God forbid that it is in the same context as before, but the commitment that we've bound together is not to be broken. And so we love you, and that's why we're there.
Thank you.
Amen. Okay, very good. You too. Lord bless you.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.